Have you ever noticed how service berries, they just seem to explode with fruit this time of year. It's like nature is overflowing. It's just overflowing with abundance, and we're all invited to share in the bounty.
Yeah, it's just such a generous offering. It really gets you thinking about different ways of exchanging value, you know, like nature's version of a gift economy.
Exactly. And speaking of gift economies, that's what we're diving into today. We've got Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, The Serviceberry, Abundance and Reciprocity in the Natural World, as our guide for this deep dive.
Well, Kimmerer's work, I always find it offers such a unique perspective, blending indigenous knowledge and scientific observation.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's unpack this idea of a gift economy. It's a system of exchange, but it operates quite differently from our familiar market-driven system.
Absolutely. In a gift economy, goods and services circulate freely without the expectation of immediate or direct compensation. Think of it less like a transaction and more like nurturing a web of relationships built on trust and reciprocity.
So it's not about tallying up who owes what, but rather understanding that contributing to the well-being of the whole ultimately benefits everyone.
Precisely. Take the serviceberry, for example. It provides a feast for birds and animals, nectar for insects, even prepares its seeds for germination by passing them through bird droppings. It's constantly giving back to the ecosystem.
And by sharing so freely, the serviceberry thrives, which seems counterintuitive in a world obsessed with competition and scarcity.
It is. It's a powerful reminder that abundance can be created through generosity. But how do we translate this natural model of a gift economy to a complex human society?
That's a great question, especially since we're so deeply entrenched in a market-based mindset. Are there any real-world examples of gift economies functioning successfully within human communities?
There are actually many, both historically and in contemporary society. Kimmerer highlights a fascinating example from indigenous cultures, the dish with one spoon treaty. The Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Anishinaabe nations of the Great Lakes used this treaty to manage their shared resources. They view the land as a gift to be cared for and shared equitably.
That's such a powerful image, everyone sharing from one dish, recognizing their interdependence. But let's be realistic, is this kind of communal resource management really feasible on a larger scale?
Well, that brings us to the often cited tragedy of the commons theory, which suggests shared resources are doomed to be exploited. But Kimmerer counters this with the work of Elinor Ostrom, a Nobel Prize-winning economist who studied communities successfully managing shared resources for centuries.
So there's evidence that cooperation and trust can actually be more effective than privatization when it comes to managing resources.
Ostrom found that clear rules, shared responsibility, and a deep understanding of local conditions were key to the success of these community-managed systems.
It's fascinating to consider this model in the context of some of the major challenges we're facing today, like climate change. Instead of competing for dwindling resources, could we find ways to manage them collaboratively for the benefit of all?
That's a crucial question, and one that Kimmerer explores through various examples. She discusses the honorable harvest, a set of guidelines followed by many indigenous cultures to ensure resources are harvested sustainably and respectfully.
So it's not just about taking what we need, but also recognizing our responsibility to give back and ensure the well-being of the ecosystem for future generations.
Exactly. It's about reciprocity, a key principle that underlies any successful gift economy.
But how does reciprocity play out in human societies beyond these indigenous examples? Do we see any expressions of gift economies in our modern world?
Oh, yeah. Kimmerer points to a resurgence of gift economy practices even amidst our market-driven society. Think about movements like free cycling repair cafes, buy-nothing groups, and the rise of open-source software. These are all examples of people choosing to share resources, skills, and knowledge freely.
So even within a system that prioritizes individual gain and competition, there's a growing desire for connection, community, and a sense of shared abundance.
Absolutely. It's a recognition that these acts of sharing are not just altruistic, but also deeply beneficial, fostering stronger communities, reducing waste, and ultimately creating a more resilient and fulfilling way of life.
But can these small-scale examples of sharing really make a difference in a system as vast and complex as ours? Are gift economies a viable alternative to our dominant economic model?
That's a critical question, and one we'll delve into further. But first, let's look at some specific stories Kimmerer shares that illustrate the power and potential of a gift economy in action.
You mentioned Kimmerer highlights some stories about gift economies in action. What were some of those examples?
Well, she talks about her neighbor, Polly, a farmer who opens up her serviceberry orchard to the community each year for free picking.
It's interesting because you'd think Polly would want to maximize her profits by selling all those serviceberries.
You think so, right? But instead, she sees it as an investment in her community. Polly recognizes the abundance she has and understands that sharing it creates goodwill and strengthens the bonds with her neighbors.
It's almost like a ripple effect of generosity. What's fascinating is that Polly's act of sharing doesn't diminish her business. It actually enhances it.
Exactly. People who come for the free service berries often return to buy other produce or support her farm in different ways. It's a reminder that generosity can be a powerful business strategy.
It challenges the traditional capitalist notion that success hinges on competition and scarcity. It seems like Kimmerer is suggesting that a mindset of abundance can actually lead to greater prosperity for everyone.
That's a key point. Kimmerer challenges the very idea that scarcity is an inherent principle. She argues that in nature, scarcity is often avoided through specialization and diversity. Different species find their niches, minimizing competition and contributing to a thriving ecosystem.
So instead of a cutthroat battle for limited resources, nature demonstrates that there are ways to coexist and even support each other's needs.
Precisely. It's a different way of looking at the world, one that emphasizes collaboration and interdependence over individual gain. But Kimmerer acknowledges that translating this natural model to a human society deeply entrenched in market-driven thinking presents unique challenges.
You mean beyond just the logistics of organizing and distributing resources, what are some of the other hurdles we might encounter?
Well, for one, there's the issue of free riders. Individuals who take advantage of the system without contributing their fair share. Kimmerer doesn't shy away from these complexities, but she also doesn't present them as insurmountable.
So how do we address these challenges? Are there any practical examples we can learn from?
Kimmerer suggests looking to indigenous communities who have successfully managed shared resources for centuries. She points to the Haudenosaunee Confederacy's Great Law of Peace, which outlines principles of governance and resource management based on consensus respect and a long-term vision.
So instead of viewing leadership as a hierarchical structure of power, they emphasize collaboration and collective decision-making.
Exactly. And their approach to resource management isn't about maximizing short-term gains, but ensuring the well-being of the community and the ecosystem for generations to come.
It's a stark contrast to our current systems that often prioritize immediate profits over long-term sustainability.
Kimmerer acknowledges that these indigenous models aren't a blueprint to be directly replicated, but they offer valuable insights into alternative ways of organizing ourselves and managing our shared resources. She encourages us to learn from these examples and adapt them to our own context.
But wouldn't a complete shift to a gift economy be incredibly difficult, if not impossible, in our current globalized capitalist system?
Kimmerer isn't advocating for a utopian overnight transformation. She acknowledges the deep entrenchment of market-driven thinking in our society.
So it's not about abandoning our current systems altogether, but rather finding ways to incorporate these principles of reciprocity and generosity into our everyday lives. What would that look like in a practical sense?
Well, for starters, we could examine our own consumption habits. Are we constantly striving for more, or are we content with what we have? Can we find ways to share resources and skills within our communities? It's about shifting our mindset from one of scarcity to one of abundance.
So instead of seeing the world as a pie that needs to be divided up, we start to see it as a garden that can be cultivated for the benefit of all.
That's a beautiful way to put it. Kimmerer emphasizes that a gift economy isn't just about material goods. It's about sharing our time, our talents, and our attention. It's about recognizing our interconnectedness and acting in ways that benefit the well-being of the whole.
So even small acts of generosity and reciprocity can contribute to this shift in consciousness. Things like volunteering in our communities, supporting local businesses, or simply offering a helping hand to a neighbor.
Absolutely. It's about building a culture of sharing and caring one small act at a time. And as we do so, we start to dismantle this pervasive myth of scarcity and open ourselves up to the possibilities of a more abundant and fulfilling way of life.
But doesn't our modern society deliberately create scarcity to drive consumption and profits?
Kimmerer points out that much of the scarcity we experience is manufactured. Think about the fashion industry that constantly churns out new trends to make us feel like what we have is never enough. Or the tech industry that designs products with planned obsolescence to ensure we keep buying new gadgets.
So it's not just about individual greed, but also about systemic forces that perpetuate this cycle of consumption and waste.
Exactly. We're bombarded with messages that tell us we need more, that our worth is tied to what we own. But Kimmerer suggests that true wealth lies in relationships, community, and connection to the natural world.
That's a radical idea in a society that places so much emphasis on material possessions.
It may seem radical, but it's a perspective that's been embraced by indigenous cultures for centuries. And as we face increasingly complex challenges like climate change and social inequality, these ancient wisdom traditions offer valuable insights into alternative ways of being and relating to the world.
It's inspiring to consider that we can challenge these dominant narratives and create a more just and sustainable future by embracing these principles of reciprocity and abundance.
It's not a naive optimism, but rather a call to action, an invitation to participate in a different way of being in the world.
So let's shift gears a bit and talk about what we as individuals can do to cultivate a Serviceberry economy in our own lives. So much of what we've talked about feels huge, global systems, economic models. But what can we actually do in our own lives to shift toward this Serviceberry way of thinking?
It's true. These concepts can feel daunting when you think about changing the whole world all at once. But Kimmerer reminds us that real change often starts small within our own communities and even within ourselves.
So what are some practical steps our listener could take to start cultivating this gift economy mindset?
One of the simplest yet most profound shifts we can make is examining our relationship with stuff.
Yeah.
Do we really need to buy that new item, or can we make do with what we already have? Could we borrow, swap, or repair instead of always buying new?
Yeah, that resonates with me. I've gotten into the habit of browsing online shopping sites almost mindlessly. It's like a default setting for boredom or stress relief. But consciously choosing to resist that impulse to appreciate what I already have feels empowering.
It is. It's a powerful act of resistance against this culture of manufactured scarcity and constant consumption. And it creates space for something much more valuable: connection with our communities. Think about the skills and resources you have to offer. Could you teach someone to garden, fix a bike, or knit a sweater? Could you organize a neighborhood tool-sharing library or a clothing swap?
Those are great ideas, and it doesn't always have to involve tangible goods. Offering our time and attention is a form of generosity, too. Checking in on an elderly neighbor, listening to a friend who needs to vent, or simply being present with our loved ones. These are all expressions of a gift economy in action.
Exactly. And these acts of care and connection create a ripple effect that extends far beyond the initial exchange. When we give freely without expectation of immediate return, we contribute to a culture of reciprocity and abundance that benefits everyone.
Kimmerer also talks about the importance of acknowledging and honoring the gifts we receive from the natural world. How can we practice that in our daily lives?
It can be as simple as taking a moment to appreciate the beauty of a sunset, the fresh air we breathe, or the food on our tables. It's about cultivating a sense of gratitude and recognizing that we're part of a web of interdependence, not separate from nature.
Oh, that reminds me of Kimmerer's discussion of the honorable harvest, which we touched on earlier. It's not just about taking what we need, but also giving back and assuring the well-being of the ecosystem for future generations.
Precisely. It's a beautiful reminder that we're not just consumers, but also caretakers of this planet. And even small actions, composting our food scraps, planting native species in our gardens, or advocating for policies that protect our natural resources, can make a difference.
This deep dive has been a real mind shift for me. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the enormity of the challenges we face. But Kimmerer's work offers a hopeful perspective, that by embracing these principles of reciprocity, generosity, and gratitude, we can create a more just and sustainable world.
It's not a naive optimism, but rather a call to action, an invitation to participate in a different way of being in the world.
So, dear listener, we leave you with this final thought. What small act of generosity or reciprocity can you engage in today? How can you become part of a Serviceberry economy in your own life? Perhaps it's sharing your abundance of tomatoes with a neighbor, offering a skill you have to someone in need, or simply taking a moment to express gratitude for the gifts you've received. Remember, even the smallest acts of kindness can ripple outward, creating a web of connection and abundance that benefits us all.